All right, welcome to the Temple of Silver Stars public webinar. My name is Matthew. I'm an academic track instructor in the Temple of the Silver Star, and this is our fifth out of 7 classes in our Astrological Magic series. So getting towards the end of the series, and yeah, we can start getting into a little bit more depth with some of the astrology. Yeah, in our last class, we went through kind of whirlwind tour through some of the real basics and some of the conceptual foundations and structures of astrology from something of a traditional perspective, mixing some traditional and modern things together, or drawing on a range of different traditions. And hopefully, there was a lot there, and of course, a lot of it was not fully developed, and we'll develop some more things today, and then for the rest of the series, actually. But one thing I really wanted to show you was the interrelation of all the different pieces of the astrological system, the way that the relationship of the signs of the zodiac and the house system, the different houses and aspects, the way that all interrelates and is all based on some very foundational geometric principles, as well as principles of actual observational astronomy, and we'll see a little bit more as we go on. When we start talking about like synodic cycles and the actual visibility of the planets in the sky, and how that really contributes to the way that things are interpreted. But today we're really going to zoom in on the signs of the zodiac. So we'll spend most of our time today talking about the basic meanings of the signs and their symbolism from an astrological perspective. And then towards the end of the class, we'll talk about how to adapt the hexagram ritual to invoke zodiacal powers. So, I'm going to assume that you've all seen the previous classes so far. If not, you'll definitely want to go back and take a look at those. And so we'll be taking the greater ritual of the hexagram that we use to invoke the planets, and then making a few modifications to that ritual so that to be able to invoke zodiacal signs, or the powers of the signs. So yeah, let's get right into it here. So yeah, just to get us started off. This is an Italian mosaic, and we've got a few things going on here. The figure standing up in the back there, that's Aeon, or at least one version of Aeon. Aeon is associated with several different mystery traditions. The probably more well-known image of Aeon from the Mithraic tradition pictures him as a lion-headed man, usually with wings and with a serpent wrapped up his body. That's particular within like the Mithraic tradition. Though other mystery traditions, some like here we just see him depicted as just a male human, and throughout, across these things, he's used as a symbol of eternity, or of unbounded time or endless time. And here in particular, he's being used as an image of cyclic time. And he's very often associated with the wheel of the zodiac. That's true in Mithraism as well. And you'll often see him standing in the middle of the zodiac wheel. So in addition to Aeon here, we also have Tellus. Tellus is the Roman version of the Greek Gaia, the Titan of the earth, the personification, representation of that primordial power of the earth. And then we also see her 4 children as the 4 seasons. So we have, let's see, spring is there on the left. Then right next to her, we see summer. And then this is fall here, and you can see the corn behind his ears there, representing the harvest. And then the one in the cloak there, that's winter. So we have the earth and the symbols of the 4 seasons. And we already talked about how the signs of the zodiac are related to the seasons in our last class here. And then we also have Aeon standing there holding the zodiac wheel. And so we have images of time here. Obviously, in seasonal terms, we have birth and death. Things are born, symbolically at least, and born in the spring, live in the summer, and then die off in the fall, and then there's a fallow period in the winter before rebirth in the spring. And so that's kind of like linear time, right? Birth and death. That's a linear orientation to time, where then Aeon represents an unbounded time and circular time. And typically when there's some weird things about the zodiac wheel depicted here, the artist has represented it so that the parts of the zodiac wheel that you can't see, there's no signs there. So he's represented all the signs visible. And it's slightly out of order. Aries is in the wrong place if you look carefully. But Aeon is depicted as generally as holding the sign of Pisces, which I've never seen an explanation of this, but I would conjecture at least that Pisces being the final final sign of the zodiac, referring to that idea that it's not the end of the zodiac, but just the return back to the beginning. So that's, I think, an interesting thing to think about as we think about the representation of time and of cycles. We have this idea of the zodiac as an eternal, cyclic time. Not eternity in terms of infinite or unending time, but particularly the infinity of a circle that neither has beginning nor end. Okay, so let's just move on from there. So if you remember from our last class here, this is kind of where we ended up. We built up some of the core concepts of the signs of the zodiac. So we have the signs there on the left, and then in the whole left portion of the table, we have the core, what I'm presenting anyways as the core determining factors and the meanings of the signs. So which planet rules that sign, what I'm calling here the polarity, whether it's a diurnal or a nocturnal sign, whether it's of the day or the night, which again was associated with odd and even from the Pythagorean symbolism. Then we also have the quality of the quadruplicity, the cardinal, fixed, or mutable. And then triplicity, or the elemental affiliation of each one of the signs. Then we also talked a little bit about the detriment, exaltation, and falls of the planets in the signs. Excuse me. And we'll be talking about that more as we go on today. But I've separated out the two parts of the table here, just because, at least in the way I'm presenting this, and the way I understand it, I think of the ruler, polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity being the defining features of the signs. And then the other things, detriment, exaltation, and fall, those are important things to know, obviously, for actually doing astrology, and they tell you a lot about the signs. Thinking about why a certain planet might be exalted in that sign, why a planet would be in their detriment or fall there, tells you a lot about that sign, but doesn't define the core meaning of that sign. There is some disagreement about that. You'll definitely see some texts where what planet is exalted in a sign actually brings some significations in, like the idea that Aries actually has a solar quality because the sun is exalted there. I don't feel that to be necessary, but there's different ways of thinking about that. So today we'll be looking at the signs, one by one, and also in more detail. And so, in trying to talk about the meanings of the signs, we'll be combining the qualities of ruler, polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity. And so, before we combine all four of these things together, it's nice to pair them off. And I think that there's a very nice way that we can go from these four qualities or four aspects, of the signs to two. Combine, or what's the word? More composite qualities. So we can combine ruler and polarity together. So we can, instead of saying that, Aries is just ruled by Mars, diurnal, cardinal, and of the element of fire, we can say that Aries is the day house of Mars. So this is like Mars in his diurnal mode. So we can combine the ruler and polarity together. And then we can also combine quadruplicity and triplicity together. So not just cardinal and fire, but cardinal fire. And then we can look at the way that each one of the signs manifests their element in the particular mode of their quadruplicity. So that Aries is cardinal fire, Taurus is fixed earth, and then from those pairs, these composite pairs, we can then have an easier way of accessing the meanings of the signs themselves. So now we can talk about Aries as the day house of Mars and as cardinal fire. All right, so let's talk about the diurnal and nocturnal planetary expressions. As we talked about last week, you'll sometimes see this as like masculine and feminine, or the signs talked about as masculine and feminine. Some even bring in, some astrologers nowadays, bring in from like Taoist and Chinese philosophy, the idea of yin and yang. I think it makes most sense just to talk about diurnal and nocturnal, and you'll definitely see that, talking about like the day house and the night house of the different planets, and that's how I access, and I think that I find the best way to think about the polarities is just in terms of this day and night affiliation. So diurnal and nocturnal planetary expressions. This is relevant for understanding the significations of the day and night houses, or the domiciles of the planets. So when we're talking about Aries, we want to think about this as being, at least in part, Mars in his diurnal mode. And then when we're talking about Scorpio, we'll be talking about Mars in his nocturnal mode. But we can also think about these qualities, whenever we're assessing a planet in a diurnal or a nocturnal sign. So we see it most clearly in the actual houses or domiciles of the planets, but we can also see it in general whenever a planet is in whenever we're delineating a planet in any sign. All right, so the sun and moon are a little bit different. The other 5 planets, we all see a definite day and a night mode for each one. The sun and moon are a little bit different. Now, it would be a little bit of an oversimplification to say that the sun only has a day mode and that the moon only has a night mode, but that's at least close to the truth. Now, the moon takes on some qualities that are similar to having both a day and a night expression in terms of her phase. So we can talk about the new moon versus the full moon, and there's certainly a light and dark polarity that in a way is, or also in terms of waxing and waning. Whether she's growing or whether she's diminishing. And we've talked about that a little bit already, and we'll talk about it more again in one of our coming, probably on the last class in the series. So yeah, right. So there is some of that logic going on with the moon, but in general, we can think of the moon as being identified with the night and as being one of the purest expressions of the nocturnal polarity. And then similarly with the sun, in general, we want to think of the sun as being identified with the day. There's some interesting, Agrippa has some interesting comments about the sun by night. He talks about how the sun by day is called Apollo and the sun by night is called Dionysus. So there is some of this symbolism and the idea of the night sun or the midnight sun. I think that's a lot of really interesting things that we can explore and think about, but it's not like primary when we're talking about the sun. And of course, we can also talk about, if any of you are familiar with, I've been thinking about geomancy a lot lately. If any of you are familiar with geomancy, you'll know that there's like Fortuna Major and Fortuna Minor. Those 2 geomantic figures are sometimes associated with like the day, the sun by day or the sun by night, or even the sun in like a northern declination versus the sun in the southern declination. So that's another way of accessing some polarity here. But for our purposes today, we'll just be identifying the sun with the day. And just some example keywords that I came up with here for the sun as related to the diurnal polarity is radiate, vivify, illuminate, direct, and express. And then the moon expressing the night polarity, I said here, receive, nurture, incorporate, feel, and embody. And so again, we can think of these, although these are particularly linked to the sun and moon, we can also think of these as linked or fairly close to just the general meaning of diurnal and nocturnal. All right, and then for the other 5 planets, we will see a particular day and night mode for each. So for Mercury by day, and again, these are just example keywords, and there's lots of other words that we could come up with, and you eventually want to come up with your own and find your own ways of thinking about these things. These are just some suggestions to get you started. So with Mercury by day, I said transmit, communicate, multiply, diversify, and adapt. And then by night, I said research, investigate, optimize, engineer, and organize. And so hopefully you can start to get a sense of how that relates to this opposition between a diurnal expression and a nocturnal expression. You can see Mercury by day, having sort of running around in the world and communicating with people, gathering and distributing information, and multiplying opinions and points of view. And then there's a sense of a not exactly extroverted, but something along those sort of lines. And then Mercury by night, you can imagine a sort of a scholar, in the dusty stacks of books, investigating, doing research, or like an engineer, really digging into the mechanics of things, right? And so these 2 sort of modes of Mercury's expression. All right, and then for Venus by day, I have here relate, harmonize, balance, promote equality, and play, contrasted with Venus by night, where I said appreciate, attract, value, beautify, and luxuriate. And so again, you can get a sense of this diurnal and nocturnal expression of the core planetary significances. So building up from what we did in our second class in the series, where we talked about some of the core meanings of each one of the planets, and now starting to develop a polarized expression of that planet based on the core meanings that we already have for it. All right, and then for Mars by day, I have here assert, contest, strive, achieve, dare, and sprint. And then for Mars by night, I said penetrate, volatilize, brood, and plunge into the depths. So I think that one's a nice clear one too, the way that you can see this diurnal and nocturnal expression. People often talk about Mars as like the warrior of the planets, and we can think about how this is a really common one that I've heard a number of astrologers use about two different types of warriors. Where Mars by day is a berserker or a gladiator or something like that, who's just running at you with a sword, and then Mars by night is some sort of ninja or assassin or something like that. It's a stealthier, quieter expression, of that warrior energy. And similarly, and of course we can then extend that to all sorts of other areas and to personality and all that. Mars by day, right, is interested in competition and in striving and achieving, whereas Mars in a more nighttime mode is interested in like penetrating into the depths of something, or like cutting to the heart of a subject, or really getting down into the depths of something. Right, and then Jupiter by day, I said quest, aspire, teach, uplift, and philosophize. And then Jupiter by night, I have accept, unify, imagine, comprehend, and meditate. And then for Saturn by day, I have step outside of systems, discover or update laws, and observe. And then for Saturn by night, I have work within systems, or impose law, persevere, or strategize. And so you can see that one's another one where you can really see that polarized expression, where Saturn, is always about limits and organize and structure and organization. But you have these two different ways of relating to those fundamental topics. And so we'll see that expressed, where with Capricorn, we'll see more of this night mode of Saturn. And then with Aquarius, we'll see this day mode of Saturn. All right, so let's shift gears here. I see someone's typing. Feel free to continue on. If you have a comment about that last slide, I can always jump back. All right, so now we can do combinations of quadruplicity and triplicity here. So I was trying to think of what the best way to get at this and to talk about this. And I think one nice way here is to use images. So I've used these natural images that I got from Crowley. This is from I think it's also in his the General Principles of Astrology, the book he did with Evangeline Adams. But you also find it in the appendix of the Book of Thoth, where he has a different natural image for each one of the quadruplicity and triplicity combinations. There's a couple of, I like some of these more than others, but I'm just going to present Crowley's here. And I think this is a great exercise, to come up with your own images and to think of, just as a way of starting to get at this logic of combining triplicity and quadruplicity. Let's see, there's a comment here. Let's see, KML says, there's an Orphic verse for Mars that asks him to use his strength to chop down the wheat. But I like to think of Mars as a strong farmer in a field. Thanks for that. Let's see. So so let's go through. Let's go kind of element by element. So we won't go in zodiacal order here, but let's just start with the element of fire, and we can look at fire in a cardinal, fixed, and mutable expression. So cardinal fire, that's Aries at the top there, and Crowley's image is lightning. And then for fixed fire, that'll be Leo, and Crowley's image is the sun. And then for mutable fire, that's Sagittarius, and Crowley's image is the rainbow. So interesting to think of lightning, sun, and the rainbow as like as fire in 3 different modes, right? I mean, lightning is pretty, cardinal is the quick, fast, inception of something, and lightning is absolutely that, right? Compared with the sun, which is a steady, constant brightness, right? And then the rainbow, Crowley's images for the mutable signs are interesting. He talks about them as being sort of like dematerialized or even spiritualized in a sense. I don't necessarily think of the mutable signs as being like more spiritual than the others, but it's an interesting way of thinking about that quality, and of a rainbow as a kind of fiery phenomenon, but somehow like immaterial or dematerialized. All right, and then let's do Earth next. So cardinal Earth, that's Capricorn, and Crowley's image is mountains. Then for fixed Earth, we have that's Taurus, we have plains, and then for mutable Earth, we have Virgo, and Crowley's image is the fields. So mountains, plains, and fields as Earth in a cardinal, fixed, and mutable expressions. Now, some of these are appropriate to the signs for other symbolic reasons, in addition to just quadruplicity and triplicity combinations here. But I think, mountains is a really interesting one for cardinal signs. It's certainly a very different sort, being in a mountain, or being on a mountain or climbing a mountain is a very different way of relating to the element of Earth than just being out in the plains, right? You're confronted with that element in a very different way. And of course, mountains are actually, it happens very, very slowly over many millions of years, but mountains actually are produced by a kind of violent action, right? The collision of tectonic plates that pushes, the Earth up into the air, right? And it happens very slowly, but that's interesting to think of that as Earth in a cardinal mode, rather than the planes, which are just sort of continuous, rolling, Earth in just a more like direct and continuous way, continuous expression, rather than a mountain, which is more literally like jagged. It has like a rising and a falling, rather than just being flat and continuous. And then the fields is an interesting one for Virgo. I think part of this has to do with the idea of like fields as places that are like sort of between other features, and seasonal changes in fields, as well as all the different types of life and things like that you encounter in fields. Though that one doesn't quite resonate with me as much as some of the other images. All right, let's do, and then we can do air next. So for cardinal air, that's Libra. Crowley has wind. For fixed air, Aquarius, Crowley has clouds. And then for mutable air, Gemini, Crowley has vibrations. So I think wind should be pretty obvious at this point. It's air in its most active mode. Bringing in new air, moving the air around. In some, in traditional astrology, what we call the cardinal signs are often called the movable signs. So this is air moving and generating motion. Now, clouds for Aquarius, we'll see, is appropriate here, also because Aquarius is called the water bearer, and clouds are literally water bearers. But thinking of that as fixed air, as air in a more fixed, like stable sort of expression. And then vibrations as maybe similar to the way that rainbows were the mutable expression of fire. It's sort of an airy phenomenon, but dematerialized. All right, and then finally for water, for cardinal water, that's Cancer. Crowley has rain, springs, etc. For fixed water, that's Scorpio. Crowley has the sea. And for mutable water in Pisces, Crowley has a pool. So springs, I think, is a really great image for cardinal water. The idea of water like appearing up out of the ground. So similar to wind and mountains, it's like the appearance or the inception or onset of that element. I think springs is a really nice image there. For the sea, for fixed water there, obviously the sea is of course there's tides and waves, but that's compared to the actual like scope of the sea, that's a very surface phenomenon. The sea is a massive and very stable and relatively unchanging thing, viewed from from a larger perspective there. And Crowley is also connecting this with some of the scorpionic imagery of putrefaction and decay. Certainly the seaside is an area where there's quite a bit of like organic decay. I grew up in a seaside town where there's a lot of fishing and stuff like that, and I definitely think of decaying organic matter, fish and plants and things like that when I think about the seaside. And then finally, we have the pool for mutable water, which again maybe is similar to the fields for mutable earth. The idea of a pool as like a temporary thing, right? It's something transitory. And if you think about the type of life and things like that you find in a pool or like a tide pool or whatever, that's like a nice image probably as well. But again, I think this is just a nice way of thinking about this stuff, and coming up with your own images and thinking through this is a really nice way of accessing these combinations of the qualities, and as these three kind of modes of expression for each of the elements. All right, another important thing that we want to take into account when we're thinking about the meanings of the signs is which signs are opposite to which other signs and the planetary relationships there. Now, we've already seen this set of opposites a few classes back with the hexagram. And so we see that the oppositions we find in the layout of the zodiac are the same sets of oppositions that we find in the hexagram. So let's start with Mercury. So we see that Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo. Gemini is opposite to Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter, and Virgo is opposite to Pisces, which is also ruled by Jupiter. So we see this opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. And we also see that in the hexagram, right? We see Mercury on the opposite side of the hexagram as Jupiter. And so thinking about how Mercury and Jupiter are opposites is a nice way of starting to access the meanings of the signs of the zodiac, right? Where Mercury is interested in multiplicity and like taking things apart and seeing how things work, dissecting and analyzing things. Jupiter is interested in synthesizing things and finding unity and wholeness. We can think about, Mercury in Virgo really has that dissecting or analyzing quality, where Jupiter in Pisces has the sense of unification. And so we can see how those are really opposites to each other. It is an analysis and synthesis, literally opposite processes. And then, Mercury in Gemini, again, this is Mercury in his diurnal mode. So kind of, running around and gathering information and opinions and points of view, where Jupiter in Sagittarius, we can think about a quest to find the truth. So an interest in Mercury in Gemini being an interest in multiplicity, opinions, multiple points of view, where Jupiter in Sagittarius is this idea of seeking the truth, rather than many different opinions or points of view on something. All right, then next we have, as we see that Venus rules Taurus and Libra. And so Taurus is opposite to Scorpio, which is ruled by Mars. And Libra is opposite to Aries, which is also ruled by Mars. So now we have that opposition between Venus and Mars. And this is something we've already talked about back in our second class when we looked at some of the dyads. We saw Mars and Venus as a dyad there. So I won't rehash all of that now. But again, we want to think about some of the meanings of the signs being, and we'll see this again in the houses, the way that opposite signs are, at least in part, defined by a contrast with each other, and how opposite signs take on opposite meanings and opposite significations. So, where Mars in Aries is interested in competition and ambition, like striving to be the best. Venus in Libra is often indicated in fairness and balance and making sure that, everyone has an equal turn, or all the voices are heard, rather than Mars in Aries, striving to have his voice heard. And not that one is necessarily better than the other or anything like that. It's just different modes or different ways of modes of expression. And then with Venus and Taurus, I'm talking about stability and pleasure and harmony, and Mars in Scorpio being interested in volatility. And there can be a relationship to kind of like a brooding on feelings, and Scorpio sometimes has a kind of a bad reputation for for bearing grudges, or for being interested in emotional pain and things like that can be a kind of scorpionic mode, or of the idea of Scorpio as Mars and Scorpio as like a penetrating or a severing, compared to Venus and Taurus talking about like preserving and stabilizing or unifying and bringing things together. All right, and then finally, we have the two signs ruled by the luminaries. That's Leo, the domicile of the sun, and Cancer, the domicile of the moon, opposite to the two signs ruled by Saturn. So we can think of both of the luminaries as signifying light, and Saturn signifying darkness. And then in particular, we can think of let's see, so the moon in Cancer, being very intimate, very personal, interested in feeling and emotion. Something very intimate. And then Saturn and Capricorn being much more objective, drier, and it's very, very different. So very like the most subjective versus the most like objective, very different expressions there. And then with the Sun in Leo versus Saturn in Aquarius, we can think of the Sun in Leo being interested in being the center. The Sun is that bright shining center, whereas especially with Aquarius, Saturn is on the outside and the periphery. So again, this opposition between center and periphery, and we see that opposition as well. In the hexagram here, we have the moon opposite to Saturn, and then of course the sun is in the middle of the hexagram, but we're sort of grouping the luminaries together as being opposite to Saturn. All right, and now we've seen this diagram before, we talked about the planets, but about the temperamental qualities of the planets, and now I've added the symbols of the elements here, and we'll bring all of that together when we're talking about the individual signs of the zodiac. So we have, we can start with choleric here. So choleric, the choleric temperament is hot and dry, just like fire is hot and dry. And so we see Mars as extremely choleric, very hot and very dry. And then the sun is more mildly choleric, warm and dry. Then we have the melancholic temperament that's dry and cold, similar to Earth, which is dry and cold. And we have Saturn as very melancholic, very cold and very dry. Then we have the phlegmatic temperament, which is cold and wet, just like water is cold and wet. And so we have both the moon and Venus as phlegmatic. The moon is definitely phlegmatic. She varies somewhat depending on her cycle. So she can warm up somewhat and dry out somewhat depending on which phase she's in. But she definitely tends towards the phlegmatic. And we think of the moon in general, we can think of her as phlegmatic. Then Venus, Venus is definitely wet, and usually there's a little bit of variation, but generally considered somewhat cool. And then finally we have Jupiter as the sanguine temperament, which is hot and wet, similar to Earth, which is hot and wet. And we can see some of the oppositions, where Jupiter is hot and wet, Saturn is cold and dry, where the sun is hot and dry, the moon is cold and wet. And so we can see how we have some of these oppositions between the planets reflected in their temperament as well. And then, as we talked about before, Mercury is the most variable, and there's a lot of disagreement in the tradition about his tendencies, though I've encountered anyways a general trend towards saying that Mercury is somewhat dry, but mostly just very variable. Taking on the qualities of planets that he's closely configured to, or like what sign he's in, and some other things too involving like solar phase. All right, so that's really the way we build up a lot of the core significations and symbolism of the signs of the zodiac. But we should address the actual constellational symbolism as well. Now, I think if you're doing, my opinion anyways, is that if you're doing tropical astrology, it makes sense. Not that you can't use the images associated with the constellations, but I think it's helpful not to rely on them. So as long as you can ground the meanings in the things we've already been talking about, rulership, polarity, quadruplicity, triplicity, then these images I think are great to use. Though I wouldn't rely on them as like a primary source for their meaning if you're doing tropical astrology. Yeah, so in the table there, I've just got the Latin. For the most part, the names we still use are the Latin names. The only slight difference is we say Scorpio rather than Scorpius, and we say Capricorn rather than Capricornus. But otherwise, we're just using the Latin names. And then we have the English translations. Yeah, Aries means ram, Taurus means bull, Gemini means twins, Cancer means crab, Leo means lion. Virgo, sometimes translated as virgin, but I think more accurately and more usefully translated as maiden. Libra means scales. Now, Libra is interesting. It's the one inanimate object here, but I don't think it's actually helpful to think of Libra as like the one inanimate sign in the zodiac. So when I think of Libra, I really think of a woman holding a pair of scales. I don't think that that's useful to think of Libra as like the one inanimate sign. Yeah, so Scorpio is scorpion, or Scorpius in Latin is scorpion. Sagittarius means archer, generally depicted as a centaur, though there's a lot of variation there too, but always as a human-animal hybrid and an archer. Now, Capricornus literally means goat-horned, generally just depicted as a goat, though coming out of the Babylonian tradition, there's also the Capricorn as the sea goat, or the goat mermaid, as I like to think of it. But goat is I think the most useful image there. Capricorn isn't particularly watery, so I think goat is the best symbol there. And obviously that's what we're like when Crowley was using mountain for Capricorn there. He's certainly thinking of the goat symbolism. All right, then Aquarius is water carrier or water bearer, usually depicted as a man bearing a vessel full of water. And again, that's where Crowley was getting some of that cloud symbolism, right? The clouds as the carriers of water. Yeah, and then finally Pisces means fishes. So yeah, so again, it's not that we can't use these things. I just think we shouldn't rely on them for the purposes of tropical astrology. All right, so now let's just go through the signs one by one, mainly just summarizing and combining together the qualities that we've already built up. And then I've just got a list of some example keywords to get you started in your thinking about the significations of the signs. So we'll just start with Aries here. So Aries, as we said, is the day house of Mars, and Aries is the ram. I've got an image there from, show you a series of images from a Renaissance era text. I forget which text that is now, but yeah. So Aries is numbered 1, which, as I may have mentioned in our last class, I think the only thing I've found anyways to be useful about the number symbolism is just whether the number is odd or even. I don't find any particular meaning beyond that. You can explore that and come to your own conclusions, but for the way I'm going to present this anyways, the only significant thing I think is the odd or even, and that's based in this Pythagorean symbolism where the odd numbers are associated with the day, as well as a number of other qualities, and the even numbers are associated with the night. So this is an odd number, so this is a diurnal sign, which is why it's the day house of Mars rather than the night house of Mars. All right, this is cardinal fire, as we've said. Now, for just the temperament here, I'm talking about the temperament derived from the element, right? So fire is hot and dry, so this is the choleric temperament, and it's ruled by Mars, and Mars is also of the choleric temperament. So Aries is very choleric, very hot and very dry. The opposite sign of Aries is Libra. So, at least in part, we're defining Aries as in that opposition to Libra. And you'll see with the keywords I've presented here, I've been trying to be more, to present more, not necessarily, positive, but not in the sense of like good, but positive in the sense of what the sign is actually like, rather than what the sign is not like. You read a lot of books and things like that. They'll talk about what Aries isn't, what the different signs aren't good at. So I've tried to talk about what the signs are more directly like in themselves, rather than what they lack. But one way of talking about the lack is by looking at the opposite sign. So generally speaking, what Aries is good at, or what Aries has trouble with, is what Libra is good at, and what Libra has trouble with is what Aries is good at. So I think that's a nice way of accessing and thinking about the balances and imbalances of the different expressions of the signs. All right, now Aries is the detriment of Venus because Venus rules Libra, and as we saw, the Mars and Venus have that oppositional quality in the zodiac. So Venus will always be in detriment when she's in a sign ruled by Mars. And at this point, I think that should be obvious, just in the way that Venus and Mars have opposite significations. So when a planet is in a sign ruled by another planet, like if Venus is in Aries, they are in a sense ruled by that other planet. So Venus in Aries is under the dominion or under the lordship of Mars, and so Mars will influence Venus, and Venus will need to sort of work through Mars, or Venus will take on some of the qualities of Mars, and that's hard. It's hard to do Venus things in a Mars sort of way because they are opposite in that way. All right, Aries is the exaltation of the sun. And there's a few things we can think about, why the sun is particularly happy to be in Aries and why the sun is an honored guest in Aries. One thing is just that the sun, and this is something we'll come back to in a later class about the elemental affiliations of the planets and which elements the planets are more or less excited to be in the signs of that element. And so the sun has a very strong preference for fire signs. The sun is definitely stronger and happier when in a fire sign. So that's part of it here too. And we can think of the sun, being exalted in areas where the sun in Leo, the sun's own domicile. I should say, some of the way of thinking about exaltation, rather than being in their own place, signs or planets are strong in their own houses because they're not under the dominion of any other planet. They're self-determining. They can do whatever they want. And they're in their own house. They have their own access to their own resources and their own stuff. They don't have to rely on someone else's things, right? Again, you think of Venus in Aries as having to do Venusian things of establish beauty and harmony and pleasure and all that, but she's in a place full of weapons and things like that, right? And that's difficult to do. Not that you can't do it, not that it's not interesting. It's just more difficult to do those things. But when a planet is exalted, they're in someone else's house, but they do very well there, and they're an honored guest there. And at least in some of the cases, we'll see that sometimes the exaltations actually help to balance out some of the natural difficulties of that sign. And we'll see that we'll see that clearly when we get to the next sign. But we think of the sun, doing well in areas where the sun in Leo, often it talks about like leadership and about kind of directing and gathering together. Aries is more like independent, and so the sun in Aries can has an easier time, I think, just sort of going out and doing things and getting things done. That cardinal quality that Aries has, contrasted with the fixed quality of Leo, can make the sun more productive and able to just sort of go out and get things done. All right, and then finally, Aries is and again, that I'm just giving a few thoughts that occur to me as we go through this. It's worth really thinking about this stuff and coming to your own conclusions, and then just paying attention to it, when reading people's charts and things like that. All right, and then finally, Aries is the fall of Saturn, and so Saturn is exalted in Libra, and so is fallen in Aries. And one way that we talk about why Saturn is exalted in Libra is because Libra is interested in fairness and harmony, and Saturn is about imposing rules and structure. And so if you're imposing rules and structure in a Libran sort of way, that's going to go well. You're interested in fairness and balance and harmony and making sure everyone's voice is heard. That's a great way of imposing rules. But in Aries, there's a hastiness or an impulsiveness and imposing rules and structure, either on yourself or on others or on the world, whatever context it's in, may be a difficult way to do that. Saturn can also talk about, responsibilities and duties, and taking on responsibilities in a hasty or impulsive sort of way may be difficult, right? You may encounter difficulties if you approach Saturn things in a Mars sort of way and in a cardinal fiery sort of way. All right, so some keywords for Aries. I have active, decisive, combustible, impatient, and courageous. Bursts of activity, assertion, engagement, immediacy, speed, risk, haste, friction, competition, and excitement. Again, these are just some examples to get you started, but hopefully it's fairly obvious how a lot of these ideas come out of the combination of these basic components that we've built up so far. All right, we've got stuff to get through, so let's just keep moving on here. All right, so next we have Taurus. Taurus is the ninth house of Venus and is the bull. All right, so Taurus is the second sign, and so that's an even number, and so it is the ninth house of Venus. It's a nocturnal sign. And Taurus is fixed earth, right? And so of all the elements, earth is definitely the most fixed, right? It has the sense of inertia and structure. And so this will be earth at its most fixed, right? So you'll really see that quality, right? You know, the bull is made, whereas the ram for Aries, I think is very, you know, thinking about what rams are like and their action and, you know, like literally ramming into things is a very nice image for Aries. The bull can be, I think, a little bit misleading sometimes for Taurus. You know, we think of bulls as like charging as well, but that's not a great way, I think, of thinking about Taurus. But thinking of a bull in its more like placid sense, you know, or even like a cow or, you know, I was thinking about, like, of course, the Hathor is female, the Egyptian, you know, goddess, but she's often depicted with a cow head. You know, that could be a nice way of connecting a little bit to Taurus, you know, to the more, you know, in Hathor it is often associated with Aphrodite and with, you know, harmony and beauty and love and all that. So this is definitely, but some of the idea of like the inertia or fixedness of a bull or of a cow, I think is a nice way of talking about some of the Taurus meanings. But just we should be careful about that. All right, so as an earth sign, we have the melancholic temperament, right? Earth is cold and dry, like the melancholic temperament. And then the ruler of the sign, Venus, is moderately phlegmatic, so cool and moist. So we see definitely an agreement about the coolness. So Taurus is definitely cool, but where the ruler is moist, the element is dry. So we'll be fairly balanced between the dry and moist qualities, but definitely cool. Right now, the opposite sign to Taurus is Scorpio. So we'll want to, you know, think about Taurus and the significations of Taurus as being derived, you know, in contrast with Scorpio. And so the ruler of Scorpio, Mars, is in detriment in Taurus. And, you know, just like we were saying with Aries, you know, Mars has trouble when he's under the dominion of Venus. When Mars has to do Mars things and the things that Mars wants to do in a Venusian sort of way, that's hard. You know, it's hard to strive and to, you know, sort of rush out and encounter, you know, kind of like butt into obstacles and all that sort of stuff. When you have to do it in a Venusian, harmonious, balanced sort of way, interested in beauty and all that. That's just difficult to do. And so there's, you know, some significations of difficulty and obstacles when a planet is in their detriment. All right, Taurus is the exaltation of the moon. And this is a nice one where you really see that idea of you know, the moon, probably the most difficult thing of the moon. And if you have like a very prominent moon in your chart, a way of talking about what would be difficult for that person is instability, right? The moon is very fast and is constantly waxing and waning. So there's an instability and a variability with the moon that can be difficult. But in an earth sign, in a fixed earth sign, there's a lot of stability is brought to the moon. So the moon in Taurus, it takes on some of that instability or that lunar sensitiveness is in a way mitigated by being in Taurus. And, you know, the Taurus, you know, as the night house of Venus, interested in pleasure and nice things and enjoyable things, that's great for the moon. The moon really enjoys having access to those like Venusian things, right? And then no planets are in their fall in Taurus because no planets are exalted in Scorpio, right? You're always defining what planet is fallen in a sign by what planet is exalted in the opposite sign, as we talked about in our last class. All right, and then some keywords for Taurus here are stable, slow, methodical, calm, passive, concrete, and sensual. You can see how a lot of this is coming from fixed earth, and then there's a Venusian element too. You know, with sensual, you know, obviously there's a Venusian quality to that, and there's also an earthy quality to that too, of being, you know, closer to the body and to sensory reality. Taurus is interested in value, pleasure, luxury, arts, beauty, taste, and refinement. So again, a lot of this is coming through Venus here, right? In a fairly concrete expression of Venus. Preserving, maintaining, and appreciating. All right, let's just keep moving on here. So now next we have Gemini, which is the day house of Mercury, and is the sign of the twins. And so with accessing this imagery of the twins, the idea of like multiplicity and duality, those are really nice ways of accessing some of the Gemini symbolism. So Gemini is the third sign, so 3 is an odd number, and so this is a diurnal sign, and it's the day house of Mercury. Now this is mutable air, and the temperament of air, air is hot and wet, so this is the sanguine temperament, and then Mercury, like we've said, is very variable. So I mean, when we talk about hot and wet, but also some of that mercurial variability, and we already have some of that changeability and motion and instability with air, and so we really get that when we're combining air and Mercury together. And the opposite sign to Gemini is Sagittarius. So again, we'll be defining Gemini in a way, as in contrast to Sagittarius, and in contrast to Jupiter, right? Like we talked about with Mercury and Jupiter as opposites. Now, there are no planets exalted in Gemini or in fall. And some Gemini keywords are quick, flexible, adaptable, multiple, unstable, open-minded, and abstract. And so you can see, again, this coming both from some of these airy qualities, the mutable quadruplicity, as well as Mercury. Gemini is interested in communication and information, opinions, options, perspectives, and contradiction. Gemini sometimes gets a bad reputation for being like hypocritical, but as someone with some strong Gemini placements myself, I like to think of Gemini as like contradiction tolerant rather than hypocritical. But you do have that idea of multiplicity and also of variability and changeability. My opinion today may be different than my opinion yesterday and tomorrow. So there's certainly that quality with Gemini. And actually, I have opinions, multiple opinions that right now that contradict themselves. That's certainly a Gemini sort of thing as well. All right, next we have Cancer. Now, Cancer is the only sign ruled by the moon. So we can just talk about Cancer as the house of the moon, but it's number 4, which is an even number, so it is a nocturnal sign. And Cancer is the crab, though, as you'll see in the image there, that's actually the picture of a lobster. And so if you look at a lot of like Renaissance in medieval imagery for the zodiac signs, you'll very frequently see lobsters for Cancer, which I don't know, I find quite amusing. And apparently the explanation for this is that because after the ascendancy of Christianity, astrology was essentially lost from Europe for many centuries, and then astrology re-entered the European world in the late medieval period, and then especially in the early Renaissance period, but was coming through the Arabic world. And so in Arabic, there's only a single, at least in medieval Arabic, I don't know if it's true in modern Arabic, but there was they had a single word that could mean both crab and lobster, so that when it was the texts were translated from Arabic into Latin, they were often translated as lobster rather than as crab. No, I don't think it makes the difference between the crab and lobster symbolism. I don't think makes a big difference. Yeah. And I've never found the crab to be extremely useful as a symbol for Cancer. I've heard different people use it for Cancerian symbolism. Certainly the idea of associating with water, I think is useful. But yeah, it's never been particularly meaningful to me beyond that. Though, it's something worth thinking about. And there are a few interesting things. Anyways, this is cardinal water. Let's see, so the temperament of water, as well as the moon, are both phlegmatic. So we'll really have Cancer will be very phlegmatic, cold and wet. All right, so opposite to Cancer, we have the sign of Capricorn. And so again, we'll be defining a lot of the meanings of Cancer in contrast to Capricorn. So the ruler of Capricorn is Saturn. So Saturn is in detriment in Cancer. It's hard for Saturn do the things that Saturn wants to do in the very personal and very intimate, and very, very close and inner sort of expression that Cancer always has. That's difficult for Saturn. Saturn can be very critical too, which again it's hard to nurture and to protect in a critical sort of way. That's a difficult thing to do. All right, and then Cancer is the exaltation of Jupiter. This is an interesting one. Jupiter is so much concerned with stability and growth and like unity and support and like opportunities and even nourishment in a sense, not quite in like the Cancerian sense, or not quite like the core or like lunar sense, but of investing in something and growing and like producing something. There's definitely a harmony between Jupiter and that aspect of the lunar symbolism. So Jupiter is said to be exalted in Cancer and to do very well there. And you can sometimes, as we'll see, Jupiter also rules the watery sign of Pisces, and so in Pisces, Jupiter can be very big and very abstract, and so in Cancer, Jupiter becomes more personal, and so that can be a really good thing for Jupiter to be more closely invested in personal things rather than in big abstract kind of cosmic or mystical things. That can be nice to have a more personal Jupiter, a Jupiter more concerned with like personal growth and nourishment. All right, and then in Cancer, Mars is said to be fallen, and so interestingly, both of the malefic planets, both Saturn and Mars, have a difficult time in Cancer. And again, like we were saying with Saturn, it's just hard when those planets and what they want to do have this deep, personal, very sensitive and intimate sort of quality, right? Mars, it's tough having a very sensitive Mars, right? You can think of like taking offense at things very easily. That's a difficult place for Mars to be. All right, and then so some Cancerian keywords here. I've got our internal, intimate, cautious, moody, right? Again, we have some of that of changing and variableness as well as feeling. And so we get the idea of mood, like very rapidly changing moods with Cancer. Cancer is interested in nurture, care, incubate, develop, protect are some good keywords. Cancer is concerned with needs, feelings, experiences, also comfort. Both dependence as well as interdependence are strong Cancerian themes. And because of this lunar symbolism, we also have a relationship to processes and cycles. And with the cardinal thing here as well, Cancer is often linked to birth and to creation. And we even saw that with that diagram of the Thema Mundi, the mythical birth chart of the universe, which has Cancer as the rising sign. There's certainly some of that idea of like the primordial creative waters, like the waters from which all of existence are born out of. That would be a very like high aspect to the Cancerian symbolism. Though again, images of birth and creation are certainly relevant to Cancer as well. All right, next we have Leo. Leo is the house of the sun. It's number 5, and so it's odd or diurnal. Leo is the lion, and lions are very in symbolism are very closely linked to the sun. So really just bringing in that solar symbolism. Lions are very often depicted, or male lions, are associated with kingship, and kings are also associated. Kings and royalty and aristocracy are all very much associated with Leo. So we connect to some of the symbolism of a lion, maybe more than thinking about what lions are actually like necessarily, but just the way the lions are used in symbolism and heraldry and things like that. All right, so the Cancer or Leo is a fixed fire sign. And with some of that fixity, like Crowley was using the sun, as a symbol of fixed fire, and we think of the sun as that constant source of warmth and light. And especially in the modern cosmology, we know that the sun doesn't really that it's our motion that causes the sun to rise or set, and our angle that is responsible for the seasons. The sun is always just itself, bright and shining in the center. It's only our relation relationship to the sun that changes. So that idea of a constant, steady center for Leo is really good symbolism here. Yeah, so Leo is, as a fire sign, is choleric, is hot and dry. Now, the sun is also choleric, but is moderate. So a little, like compared to Aries, we're still talking about a choleric temperament, but a little more moderate and not quite as extreme as Aries is. All right, so the opposite sign is Aquarius, and so the ruler of Aquarius, Saturn, will be in detriment in Leo. And we talked about, the idea, the sense of the symbolism of Aquarius as being, like outside and outside of limits, like outside of a culture or a family. There's a kind of black sheep kind of quality to Aquarius, whereas Leo is very much about being the center of things, like we were talking about with that solar imagery. And then no planets are exalted or in fall in Leo. All right, and then so some Leonine keywords here are bright, warm, regal, vigorous. Vigor coming through the sun. That's the symbolisms of vitality and energy, as well as the fire here. And constant too, right? That sense of a fixed, constant source of light and warmth. Shining center, leader, visionary. Seeing and being seen in a lot of, especially ancient symbolism, the sun is connected to the idea of the sun is thought to be an all-seeing eye, and of course also the source of light, which allows things to be visible. So there's that visionary quality, or that sense of seeing, and also of being seen, right? I mean, Leos get kind of a bad reputation sometimes for always needing to be the center of attention, and certainly we can think of someone like on a stage, an actor performing. Someone who is the center of attention, being a good Leo, a good image for Leo. So I have performing, illuminating, strength, virtue, authenticity, and presence. Authenticity I think is a nice, really helpful keyword for Leo. I've definitely seen that in people's charts. Having planets in Leo, there's often a concern for authenticity, which again makes sense. We're talking about that center and that constant bright, that constant bright center being related to the idea of authenticity. All right, next we have Virgo. So Virgo is the ninth house of Mercury and is the maiden. In the image there, it looks like she's holding some flowers there. Virgo is very often depicted holding what do you call it? Not an ear of wheat, but like a sheaf or whatever, a single stalk or whatever the word is of wheat there. Virgo is associated with the harvest, and of course that's like seasonal symbolism. Virgo being the end of summer and the time when the grains were harvested. That sheaf of wheat is often is taken to be the brightest star in Virgo, is the star Spica, and Spica is often identified with that sheaf of wheat. Spica is very visible in the sky, in the eastern sky, a little after sunset now. You can go out and look towards the east, and that bright star you'll see is Spica, the brightest star in Virgo. All right, so Virgo is a nocturnal sign because numbered 6, an even numbered sign, and Virgo is mutable earth. Now, the temperament of earth is melancholic, cold and dry, and then we have Mercury, which is variable but tends towards dry, so emphasizing that dry aspect of Mercury here. And when we think about, as we've talked about a little bit, the dryness having that sense of separation, where water, the wet quality tends to be about unification and bringing together. There can be a sense of separation with the dry quality, and certainly separating and analyzing is some really core Virgo keywords. As we've already talked about a little bit, Virgo is opposite to Pisces, which is very wet and interested in unity and harmonizing and comprehending and bringing things together. And that's Pisces is ruled by Jupiter. And so Jupiter is thought to have a difficult time in Virgo for a lot of the reasons we've already been talking about here. Now, interestingly, not only is Virgo ruled by Mercury, but Mercury is also exalted in Virgo, and this is the only time, the only sign in which the ruler is actually exalted in the sign. Part of this is Mercury like breaking rules. We didn't really have a chance to get into a lot of depth with the exaltation scheme last time, but there's a particular pattern involved with the aspects that the sign that a planet is exalted in. So I'll just say it now. The planets that we talked about sect, the day and night, where the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn are of the day sect, and the moon, Venus, and Mars are of the night sect. And so the signs in which the night planets are exalted makes a sextile aspect to one of that planet, one of the domiciles of that planet. And then for the 3-day planets, the sign in which they are exalted makes a trine to one of their domiciles. And so Mercury, as not belonging to either the day or the night sect, doesn't make any that sort of aspect, and so instead is just exalted in one of his own signs. So again, about Mercury not following the pattern of either the day or the night planets. But we can also think about why Mercury might do better in Virgo, and why the earthy quality of Virgo, might be helpful compared to the airy quality, right? Earth is certainly both Gemini and Virgo are both mutable of the mutable quadruplicity. So you definitely have an emphasis on that mutable and changeable side of things. But compared to air, Earth is definitely the more stable and the drier as well. And so we can think about how Mercury in an Earth sign compared to an air sign might help to balance out some of Mercury's natural tendencies towards variability and in inconstancy. All right, and then let's see, where are we here? So Virgo is the fall of Venus. As we'll see, Venus is exalted in Pisces, and so she's in fall in Virgo. And I think that should be fairly intuitive, obviously, with Virgo being interested in being critical and discriminating and analyzing and taking things apart all the time. It can be difficult to do Venusian things of harmony and pleasure and enjoyment when you're analyzing things all the time, right? Yeah, hopefully that's just fairly intuitively obvious there. All right, so some keywords for Virgo. We have critical, discriminating, aloof, analyzing, digesting. Digesting is a good one too. Not only like digesting information, taking something and processing it and breaking it down to be able to understand it. But in some of the systems of what are called like Melathesia and like medical astrology, Virgo is often thought to rule the digestion and the bowels. So we get some of that literal digestion connected to Virgo as well. But it's also nice in just a metaphorical sense of like digesting information, as opposed to like the Gemini mode of like multiplying information. Virgo's like processing information and refining. So yeah, digesting, investigating, researching. Virgo's interested in details, facts, observations. And I said, organize, dissect, improve, refine, and reverse engineer. I'm just using reverse engineer here in the sense of like taking things apart and understanding how they work, working backwards to the principles of something by dissecting it. It's a very like Virgoan mode of relation. All right, then we have Libra. Libra is number 7. So it's an odd number, a cardinal sign. Again, this is the day house of Venus. The image here is the scales, and so certainly the images of balance are very good. The scales were often used, for commerce, and so like commerce and relation and exchange and value are all good keywords here. And like I said, I prefer to think of these as like a woman holding a pair of scales rather than an inanimate object. This is an air sign, so the sanguine temperament, and Venus is of the phlegmatic temperament. So we have kind of a balance between the cool and the hot, and then but an agreement about the moistness. So definitely a wet sign and fairly balanced in terms of temperature. Opposite sign of Aries, and we've already talked about some of the significations of Aries here. So thinking about this in contrast to those significations. Detriment of Mars, as we've already talked about. I even mentioned exaltation of Saturn here too. Saturn does very well when Saturn has to operate in a Libran sort of mode. And Libras, the air signs are always a bit more social, more interactive. More interested in getting along and relating to other people. And in a Venusian sort of way, you can see how that helps to really balance out some of Saturn's tendencies and how Saturn does very well here. And then Libra is the fall of the sun. This is another interesting one too. The sun is like that bright, shining center that wants to be, like on stage and being like the center of attention. Where Libra is interested in making sure that everyone's voice is heard in equality and fairness and balance. And so it can be difficult for the sun to like express that inner like truth of the self by making sure that everyone gets to express their own truth or something like that's just a difficult thing to do. So not that a Libra sun is bad or anything like that. It's just that the sun has trouble being the sun when it has to be concerned with balance and equality. All right, so some keywords here: social, diplomatic, aesthetic, engaging, relating, interacting, exploring, exchange, commerce, enjoyment, play, balance, ratio, harmony, justice, equality, and fairness. All good Libra keywords here. All right, let's just keep moving on here because there's a couple other things we want to do after we get through the signs. All right, so Scorpio is number 8, an even sign. So this is the ninth house of Mars, and we have the Scorpion here, which is overall, I think, a pretty good image. What we've already talked about, with Scorpio being like the kind of the ninja or whatever as a warrior. The image of a Scorpio that like penetrates, with its stinger, that's a nice image. This is a fixed water sign. So interestingly, Scorpio is one of the 2 signs where the temperament of the ruler is like the opposite to the temperament of the element. So where as a water sign, it's phlegmatic, is cold and wet. Mars is hot and dry. And interestingly, as we'll see, the other sign, Aquarius, will be the other two, the other pair of opposite here. The fire and water are the most volatile signs. So here we have opposites, but they're very like volatile opposites. And so that brings a sense of volatility to Scorpio. Opposite to Taurus, as we've already talked about, detriment to Venus, as I don't think we need to talk more about here. In the fall of the moon, the moon in Scorpio, there can be a sense of like brooding, and that sensitivity, is hard in relationship to Mars. And when it's fixed and interested in the depths and things like that, there can be a preoccupation or a fixedness on some of the more difficult emotions and conflict and things like that. And that can be very hard for the moon and hard for the moon to do the lunar things of comfort and nurturing when she has to do it in this scorpionic mode. All right, so some keywords for Scorpio. I have here intense, focused, precise, cynical, brooding, suspicious, and determined. Scorpio is interested in the classic pair of sex and death. Secrecy, danger, volatility, I said piercing to the core. And again, this can be, I've known a bunch of people with strong Scorpio placements who are interested in esoteric subjects or who are great scholars and things too. And so this piercing to the core can be really, trying to get to the heart of a matter, trying to really understand the core or essence of the self or of reality or of whatever particular subject, Scorpio is interested in. This is, definitely not like a negative thing. There can be a difficulty related to it, but it can also be a really excellent quality. Yeah, and penetration, perception, and investigation. That sense of like a focused penetrating to the depths of something or to the heart of something. That's I think a nice way of accessing Scorpio's qualities. All right, then we have Sagittarius, who is the archer, depicted in lots of as different hybrids. Classically, as like a centaur, but you'll see lots of variations on that throughout the tradition. But I think the idea of hybridity is really like the core, as well as the idea of the archer who like fires an arrow, shooting at a target. I think that's nice, like Sagittarian imagery. This is, mutable fire. So yeah, fire in its most mutable and in kind of dematerialized sort of mode. Fire is choleric, hot and dry, where Jupiter is mildly sanguine. So there's definitely a warmth and then fairly balanced between wet and dry. Opposite to Gemini and the detriment of Mercury, as we've already been talking about here. And some good Sagittarian keywords are optimistic, passionate, wide-ranging, skillful, goal-oriented, and judgmental. And I think we can see how that comes through both this combination of fire and Jupiter. So your quest to unify, unite, and combine can all be very like Sagittarian qualities. And as you see in the tarot, there's some definite like alchemical symbolism with Sagittarius and in the path of Samek, on the tree of life, and as being interested in the unification of opposites and that quest for like the one or transcendental truth. That's all very like Sagittarian. So teach, theorize, preach, and inspire. And also, coming through some of this archer symbolism as well as the fiery quality of reaching and extending. And there's also the mutable quality of trying to understand things and take stock of things and see, sort of what's been, and that sort of philosophical kind of orientation there. All right, next we have Capricorn, an even-numbered sign. So this is the ninth house of Saturn, and the image here is the goat. Which connects to some of this earth symbolism and to some of the kind of the loneliness and the solitariness that can come with Capricorn. And that's a nice way of talking about Capricorn as the opposite of Cancer too. Cancer can be very personal, wanting to in the moon especially really likes to relate, both to other planets and to have close connections. Where Capricorn can be kind of solitary. So that's another way that the moon and Saturn can be kind of opposites of wanting to be solitary or wanting to have close connections. All right, so the sign of Capricorn, Earth and Saturn, agree in being cold and dry. So we're very cold and very dry, and that's another reason that the moon has trouble here. All the lunar sensitiveness and lunar needs. When it takes on this really, really dry quality, there can be a difficulty in accessing needs and then difficulty in knowing how to nurture the self or nurture others. That can be kind of a struggle if the moon is in Capricorn. Capricorn is the exaltation of Mars, and we can think of Mars in Capricorn. Capricorn is cooler, right? So it sort of cools down some of the rashness of Mars. And Capricorn is very structured and strategic. So in Capricorn, Mars is strategic and is a little more calculated and more carefully planned. And so Capricorn helps to balance out some of the imbalances of Mars. And then Capricorn is the fall of Jupiter, that the darkness and the isolation, and Capricorn can be very, very realistic and very critical. It's hard to do all that. That Jupiterian, optimism can be very difficult to do in Capricorn. So some, Capricornian keywords here. I have reserved, careful, strategic, enduring, responsible, planning, organizing, also self-critical. That can be a struggle for people with, a lot of Capricorn placements sometimes, as being excessively self-critical. Capricorn is interested in laws, rules, security, and structure. Now, this can be the rules of, a society or of a workplace or something like that. But it could also be the rules of nature or, natural law and things like that too. There's an orientation towards rules and understanding the rules, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the social rules or the rules of any given place. It can also be this more natural kind of mode. Of understanding the true rules behind something rather than what appears to be the rules or whatever. That can be very Capricornian. Capricorn's interested in discipline, control, and I said that Capricorn is dark, old, and primal. That's all good Capricorn symbolism. All right. Aquarius, number 11, this will be the day house of Saturn. And interesting, right, as we saw, because Saturn is opposite to the luminaries, Saturn signs are right next to each other. And this is the water bearer, which is, I think, not the most extremely useful image. Some of that imagery of clouds, there's certainly a kind of heavenly or celestial kind of being remote and far from the earth that can be appropriate for Aquarius. But Aquarius is not a water sign, so I don't think we want to rely too much on that image. But it's interesting to think about, and there's certainly useful aspects of it that you can reflect on. All right, so this is fixed air. So the temperament, now here again, we have the opposite, where the air is hot and wet, but Saturn is cold and dry. But here we have the more inert elements. And so, yeah, I was thinking of this as that, again, some of that cloud sort of symbolism of the air as like separate from the earth and not really interacting, of being, yeah, kind of separate and distanced. It is, I think, a nice way of thinking about the temperament of Aquarius. Opposite sign to Leo and detriment to the sun, as we've already been talking about. And some Aquarian keywords are outsider, scientific, detached, abstract, broad, intellectual, skeptical, revolutionary. Aquarius is interested in designing, building, discovering principles, laws, alternatives, and Aquarius can be idealistic and future-oriented. That idea of imagining other ways that societies can be set up, and imagining other rules that we could have is all very Aquarian. And you can see the way that, like in modern astrology, the idea that Aquarius is ruled by Uranus. You can see why that idea developed, that idea of being kind of revolutionary, or being like an outsider. Though I think Aquarius sometimes gets the reputation, when that Uranian symbolism is brought in, Aquarius sometimes gets a reputation for being like really bizarre and weird, and that's not always necessarily the case. I forget where I got this from, but I heard some astrologer talking about Aquarius as like an anthropologist, which I liked, that idea of being like an anthropologist inside of your own culture, or even like inside of your own family, of somehow standing outside and observing like from the outside the way that things are, and sometimes imagining or comparing that to like other possible ways that things can be. That can be a nice way of talking about Aquarius too. Aquarius isn't always like super bizarre and weird. They don't all have green mohawks and things like that, right? Let's see. So the image of so the Caribs are a complicated thing, and there's like different sort of traditions of that. I mean, certainly the idea of Aquarius as like a humane sign, and Aquarius is interested in social things. I think that image of a human being is appropriate. Though for other contexts, like we in our tradition often use the image of an eagle as the cherubic sign of Aquarius. Though certainly that idea of being humane and interested in social things and society, I think, is appropriate. So yeah, it's good symbolism to be aware of. Yeah. All right, and then last here we have Pisces. So number 12, even number. So this is a night house and is ruled by Jupiter. Pisces is the fishes, which, besides the fact that the fish are connected to water, and this is very definitely a water sign, I don't think of the fishes as being particularly useful. Fish has the associations with like coldness and being like kind of cold-blooded, and I don't think that that's a very useful way of accessing Pisces, other than just the fact that the fish live in water. All right, so this is mutable water, and so water is already a very mutable sign, and so this is going to be water at its most mutable. So there's definitely going to be a formless kind of quality to Pisces here. So temperament is phlegmatic, cold and wet. Jupiter's temperament is mildly sanguine, so fairly balanced in terms of temperature, but definitely very wet. Opposite to Virgo, and I think we've already talked about Virgo and Mercury, and why Mercury is sort of doubly had difficulty in Pisces, because Mercury both rules Virgo and is exalted there. So Mercury is both in detriment and in fall in Pisces. I think it doesn't mean, if you have Mercury in Pisces, it doesn't mean that you're that Mercury or your intellect or language or whatever is bad in some way. I've definitely seen a number of poets and writers and things like that who have Mercury in Pisces, though it is difficult. It's a difficult thing to do, and there's a lot of value in doing difficult things, right? So Mercury in Pisces can still be really excellent, and there's lots of other things that we want to take into account when assessing like the quality of a planet, besides just what sign it's placed in. But certainly Mercury struggles in Pisces. All that the formlessness and unity in Pisces, it can be hard to do that mercurial analysis of breaking things down into their individual pieces. That can be hard to do in this sort of big, expansive, somewhat formless, unifying environment of Pisces. All right, and so for some Piscean keywords here, I had broad, expansive, formless. calm, soft, indulgent, right? There can certainly be an indulgent quality in Pisces with Jupiter in his night mode. And also holistic, interested in wholes and totalities. Pisces is interested in meaning and imagination, right? And so we get some of that watery quality of like reflectiveness that's very useful for thinking about Pisces. And Pisces is interested in comprehending, absorbing, including, and also accepting contradictions. Pisces is very is comfortable with contradiction. And again, with the watery sensitiveness and orientation towards like feeling and connection, and those Jupiter qualities, there's definitely a sympathy and a compassion involved in Pisces. This is, again, we can see how like the idea of Neptune ruling Pisces in modern astrology, there's some of that quality, though. Jupiter is always interested in like a cohesiveness and a stability too that I think you kind of lose when you've got just Neptune as ruling Pisces, where Neptune is just that like kind of formless quality, but I think it's important to bring those Jupiterian aspects here as well. Because Pisces can sometimes get a little bit of a bad reputation too, but I think you get a much more balanced perspective on Pisces when you bring in the Jupiterian symbolism. All right, I'm just going to skip over that for a moment. Let's see. Yeah, let's do this real quick, and then I'll jump back to that. So transforming, sorry, we're going over time as always, but hopefully anyone showing up here doesn't mind me talking a little bit longer than I said I would. Anyways, so to adapt the greater ritual of the hexagram for the zodiacal signs, we're basically, it's very, very similar to just the greater ritual of the hexagram for the planets, just with a few small changes. So again, the basic structure is going to be exactly the same. We're going to do the analysis of the keyword, then we're going to go to the quarters and draw a hexagram, and then intone a series of names. And again, we'll use a divine name followed by an archangelic name followed by Ararita. We'll do that in all 4 quarters, and then we'll come back to the center and do the analysis of the keyword again. And there's also a very similar optional 5th hexagram that we can use as well. So the only real differences are going to be here that instead of using the planetary colors, we're going to use the zodiacal colors instead, and I'll show you those in just a minute. And so we're going to use the same hexagram, though, as the ruling planet. It'll just be traced in the zodiacal colors rather than the planetary colors. Then in the center of the hexagram, you'll draw the glyph of the sign rather than the glyph of the planet. And then you'll use the divine name appropriate to the sign, as well as the archangel appropriate to the sign rather than the planet. And then you'll vibrate Ararita. So just different color, different glyph in the center, and different hierarchy. Other than that, it's exactly the same as the hexagram ritual for the planet that rules that sign. Then for the 5th optional hexagram, you can face the direction of that sign in the sky at this time, if that's something you know how to calculate, or you can face the planet as well. You could use the sign itself or the lord of that sign, the planet that rules that sign. You could use either one, or you can face the cube of space, and there's the cube of space there. And so the edges are associated with the signs of the zodiac. So you could face the edge, which is a little bit weird. So you could also face the face attributed to that planet. So if you're invoking Pisces, you could face this like the lower southern edge, or you could face the western wall, because the western face of the cube of space is attributed to Jupiter. So you could do either one, or you could face the current location of Pisces in the sky, or the current location of Jupiter in the sky. That would all be appropriate. All right, and then zodiacal colors in the king scale here. So we're just going from Aries down to Pisces here, and I think it's pretty obvious what the logic is here, right? Similar with the planets, we're dividing up the visible spectrum, but now we're dividing into 12 parts rather than into 7 parts. So we have a finer gradation here. So we're just going from scarlet or red, up to violet in Aquarius. And then with Pisces, we start to loop back around, and now we're between violet and scarlet with crimson. So you can see that some of that way that, similar actually to the image of Aeon at the center, the way that Pisces has that symbolism of being both the last, but also like the return to the beginning again, which is really nice. You'll also see in 777, Crowley also gives ultraviolet to Pisces. Now, obviously, that's not practical because you cannot visualize, well, unless you have some really extraordinary visualization powers, you can't visualize ultraviolet light. And I think it also loses that idea of the return to the beginning and the cycle here, whereas if it was ultraviolet, it would be a purely like ascending scale. And I think it's nicer to have that circular imagery here. All right, and then zodiacal hierarchies. Now, for the divine name, you can use, there's two different names you can choose from, or you can use both. I like to use both. You can use the divine name of the domicile lord of that sign. So you can use the divine name associated with the planet of that sign, like for Pisces or for Sagittarius, you can use the divine name of Jupiter, El. Or you can use something called the 12 banners of the name. This is from the Sefer Yetzirah, and they're just 12 permutations of the letters Yod, He, Vav, He. There's 12, as long as you don't distinguish between He and He final, you have 12 unique permutations of those letters. And so each permutation is associated with one of the signs. I find those permutations less like personally meaningful and relevant. So I really like using the divine names where I have a lot of meaning and significance built up with those divine names compared to just like the permutations of the letters. But I like using both, the idea of calling in the planet and the ruler of the sign, and then the banner of the name being a kind of like differentiation or specification of the particular mode that planet is expressing itself through one of the signs that it rules. All right, then we'll also have an archangel for the Briatic level, and each sign has its own archangel associated with it. And then for the Yetziratic level, there's tons of different Yetziratic names associated with the signs of the zodiac, including like subdivisions of the zodiacal signs, like the decans, both the decans by day and by night. Also angels of the triplicities and a whole bunch of other things. But just for our purposes and for basic practice, you can just use two names. You can use the angel ruling the sign, and then the lesser assistant angel in the sign. And then just going down to Yetzirah, as we talked about, is usually sufficient. But if you're actually trying to bring this down into like the manifest world, then you can also vibrate the heaven of Asaya, which is simply the Hebrew name for that sign of the zodiac. All right, so now mainly I'm just giving you this slide deck as a reference for your own use, but we'll just look at just a couple real quick, just so you can see the pattern. Right, so for Aries, I've got more zodiacal images from this is a Renaissance era Book of Hours. For just some more imagery for you there. And I've also got incenses for the different signs. Now each sign will have its own incenses, and sometimes there's overlap. Like Dragon's Blood is actually one of the incenses of Mars, and is particularly appropriate for Aries. But you can substitute in any incense of the planet for the sign. So it's helpful if you find an incense that also has some sense of like harmony or sympathy with the element. But yeah, it's perfectly fine to substitute in just one of the incenses of the planets. And then, for doing planetary and zodiacal work, you only need to have 7 different incenses rather than like 19 different incenses. So yeah, that's fine to substitute there. So yeah, as we talked about, so this will be your hexagram of Aries. So you're drawing it exactly the same way as your Mars, and actually this one actually lines up. So the colors here are actually the same as the hexagram of Mars, but we'll see others that are not the same. So you're drawing it in exactly the same way as you draw the hexagram of Mars, but then you're just drawing the Aries glyph in the center. All right, and then here's your hierarchy of Aries. So from the banners of the divine name, now Aries is the first permutation, so it actually is Yod He Vav He. Then we have the divine name of Mars, Elohim Givor. And then we have the archangel of Aries, Malkidiel, the angel ruling the sign, Aiel, the lesser assistant angel in the sign, Sarahiel, and then just the Hebrew name for Aries, which is Telah. All right, and then we have Taurus here. So again, we won't go through all of this, but I'll just, anyone who wants the slides, I'll post it on the forum for members, and then anybody else who wants the slides, I'm happy to share it, as your resource here. And so here you can see that it's this, you're drawing the hexagram the same way you draw the hexagram of Venus, but you're visualizing it in a background of the Taurus color, and then the hexagram and the sign are being drawn in the complementary color, which interestingly, the complementary color is going to be the color associated with Scorpio. So you get some of that zodiacal opposition right in the right in the color imagery here too, which I think is really nice. All right, and there's your hierarchy of Taurus, and you can see here now we're at Yod He He Vav, right? The first of our permutations, then the divine name of Venus, and then the angels associated with Taurus, and then finally Shor, the Hebrew name for Taurus. And so then, yeah, just the same going through the other signs. Gemini here, right? Drawing the same way as the hexagram of Mercury, but using the glyph of Gemini and the colors of Gemini. Then the hierarchy of Gemini here. Another Cancer lobster here. Hexagrams of Cancer, hierarchy of Cancer. Now Leo here. So for the hexagram of Leo here, you can use either the unicursal hexagram. I don't have an image of it here, but you could also use the traditional way of drawing the overlapping hexagrams for the sun. If you're interested in doing that, though, you can also just use the unicursal hexagram for the sun, and then just drawing the glyph of Leo in the center. Hierarchy of Leo, and again, the divine name for the sun, Yod He Vav He Eloah Voda'af. It's also fine to abbreviate that as EAO. Virgo. Again, you can see there she's holding the wheat in that image there. Hexagram of Virgo, again, drawing the same as the hexagram of Mercury and the same as the hexagram of Gemini, but in a different color and with the glyph of Virgo in the center. Hierarchy of Virgo here. Libra. Hexagram of Libra. And actually, this is another one that lines up too. You know, these colors are the same as the hexagram of Venus. So this is another place where you get an alignment. Scorpio, which is really the artist here, obviously had never actually seen a scorpion, which is funny. Yeah, hexagram of Scorpio, hierarchy of Scorpio. Sagittarius, another interesting composite image. Like, this is not actually a centaur, right? I'm not quite sure what animal that is, but it's obviously not a horse. And like I said, you'll see a lot of different variations in the imagery of Sagittarius throughout the tradition. Hexagram of Sagittarius, hierarchy of Sagittarius, then Capricorn, Aquarius. All right, and then finally Pisces. All right, so yeah, so that's it. Let's see, we're already a couple minutes over. I don't know, do people want to hang out for, I don't know, maybe 5-10 more minutes? And we can talk about one other thing about planetary rulership, or we can just save it for next time. I don't know, anyone have any thoughts on that? Okay, all right, sure. All right, so there's a concept in delineating and understanding planets and signs that's called reception. So when a planet is in a sign that's not their own sign, they are under the dominion of the Lord of that sign. You know, so in our image here, this is just an example chart that I made up here. You see Saturn is in Scorpio. So Saturn here is not in his own sign. He's in a sign ruled by Mars. And so Saturn is under the dominion of Mars and is in a sense ruled by Mars and takes on some of those martial qualities. And so what we can do is we can ask what the relationship between the planet in that sign and the planet that rules that sign. So we can look at what aspect is made between Saturn and the domicile lord of Scorpio, which is Mars. And here they're in a square, but like a whole sign square. And so the idea is that if they make a whole sign aspect, if they're not in aversion to each other, if they have an aspect to each other, then that planet is said to be received. So in this example here, Saturn is received by Mars by a square aspect. And so reception is a good and helpful quality. Being received by the Lord of the sign, and so having a whole sign aspect to the Lord of the sign is supportive, and the planet will do better in that sign if it has that aspect than if it doesn't. And the quality of the aspects are also improved by reception. So although a square is a difficult aspect, especially between Mars and Saturn, a square would be a difficult aspect between the two malefics. The fact that Saturn is in Mars's house will be, you can kind of think of this as Mars, because Saturn is like a guest in Mars's house. Mars is sort of predisposed a little bit more favorably towards Saturn and has some kind of responsibility for Saturn's well-being. And so that square will be not as difficult as it normally would be because of that reception. So reception both improves the quality of the aspect between those planets and it improves the sign-based condition of the planet that is received. So this is both making it better for Saturn to be in Scorpio as well as making the square between Saturn and Mars a little bit easier. So we can say that reception mitigates difficulties and it amplifies benefits. Reception improves both of those things. And then we also have a quote, we can talk about mutual reception, which is when two planets are in each other's signs. That will show a very strong level of cooperation between the two planets and is really good and really supportive for both of those planets. Yeah, so we already used the example of Saturn being in the domicile of Mars here and received by Mars. Now the moon here is in Aquarius and is received by Saturn because she makes a whole sign aspect to Saturn. And so again, the moon in a Saturn ruled sign, that's always a little bit difficult for the moon. And the moon having a square to Saturn, that would be difficult as well. But both of those things are going to be somewhat mitigated by the fact that the moon is received by Saturn. The moon is a guest in Saturn's house and Saturn will be, a little bit better disposed towards the moon and a little more concerned with the moon's well-being here. So that'll make things a little bit easier than either just a square on their own or just being an Aquarius without a whole sign aspect. All right, and now in this example here, we see that Mars is in Leo, which is the domicile of the Sun, and the Sun is in Aries, which is the domicile of Mars. So we would say that Mars and the Sun are in mutual reception. They're each in each other's houses, and they're configured by aspect. And it's a trine as well, right? We know that two planets and signs of the same element have a whole sign trine to each other, and that's the friendliest aspect. So this is really good for both Mars and for the Sun. And we'll note that in this example here, the Sun is in Aries, which is the exaltation of the Sun. So this is a really excellent configuration, and this is going to be one of the sort of best case scenarios for relationships between Mars and the Sun. This will be definitely the sort of most beneficial, helpful, constructive version of a Sun-Mars relationship here. Let's see what I have next. Okay, and then Venus. Now Venus is in Taurus here in our example. So Venus is in her own sign. She's not received by anyone because she's in her own house, right? She's her own master here. She doesn't have to rely on any other planet to do what she wants to do. Right. So we don't need to talk about reception when a planet is in its own sign because they're not ruled by another planet. Now we also see Mercury in Taurus here, and so Mercury would be received by Venus because Mercury is in Venus's house, and Venus is there too, also in the house, and so that's another strong reception. Venus will be able to look out for Mercury and see to his needs and all that. So this is good and helpful for Mercury. And so, again, you'll see that the most positive, as we talked about a little bit, Venus and Mercury can be a little bit at odds with each other, at times. It can be hard to do Venusian things in a mercurial sort of mode, hard to have like pleasure and harmony and fun in an enjoyment when you're trying to analyze and take things apart all the time. But this will be like kind of like best case scenario, or one of the best case scenarios for a Mercury Venus relationship here. And I've definitely seen a number of poets and things like that with these types of Mercury Venus relationships here, where Mercury is in a Venus ruled sign and has this close relationship to Venus and is supported by Venus, so that mercurial like language facility could be could take on all the artistic qualities of Venus. And like I said, I've seen this both in Taurus as well as in having Mercury and Venus together in Taurus or in Libra. I've seen that in a bunch of poets, right? And so that's a kind of best case or one of the sort of versions of a best case relationship between Mercury and Venus. All right, and then finally, we have Jupiter in Cancer here, which is good. That's the sign of Jupiter's exaltation. But Jupiter is not making a whole sign relationship to Aquarius, right? Jupiter Cancer is opposite to Capricorn and trine to Pisces, but there's no whole sign aspect to Aquarius. And Cancer and Aquarius, don't share any of their fundamental qualities in common. So there's no relationship between Jupiter and the Moon. And so while, Jupiter being on the sign of its exaltation is good, it's not best case scenario good. It's a little bit, closer to a mid-level. It's not as extremely helpful for Jupiter because Jupiter doesn't have the same level of support from his domicile lord. The moon isn't sort of available to help out Jupiter and to support Jupiter in her sign. So you want to look for, the presence or absence of reception whenever you're trying to understand a planet in its sign. And this is one way that, like those, books where you just sort of look up what, a planet in a sign means, that's a good, helpful place to start. But looking at the relationship between the planet and the planet in the sign and the planet that is that rules that sign is another way of understanding, how these things play out, and understanding why, sometimes, you'll see that the more positive or sometimes the more difficult possible, significations for planets and signs. One way of accessing that is through reception and the relationship of a planet to that planet's domicile lord. So just a summary of some basic places to start whenever you're assessing planets and signs. You can ask, the sort of basic things of, does a planet rule that sign? Is the planet in their own house, or is the planet exalted in that sign? Or, on the flip side, is the planet in detriment or fall in that sign? Then we can start looking at a more qualitative, aspect of this, where we're saying, look at the polarity, quadruplicity, and triplicity of the sign, and then think of how that colors that planet's expression. How is Venus in a cardinal sign different than Venus in a fixed sign and different than Venus in a mutable sign? How is Venus in a fire sign different from Venus in an earth sign, different from Venus in an air sign, different from Venus in a water sign? How does taking on those elemental and quadruplicity qualities color how that planet expresses itself? All right, and then finally, if a planet is in a sign ruled by another planet, if a sign is somewhere other than its own domicile, first of all, how does the qualities of the ruler, how does that modify the planet's basic expression? Mercury in Aries will take on some of those martial qualities, and so you can combine some of the symbolism of Mercury's and Aries together, Mercury and Mars, as well as the fire and the cardinality, to talk about how Mercury in Aries is different than Mercury in any other sign of the zodiac. Then we can also look at reception too, to talk about that. Is this going to be like the better side? Is Mercury does Mercury have a trine in Aries? Does it have a trine to Mars, or is Mercury in aversion or in square or in opposition? And how does that sort of color what Mercury in Aries is going to be like? So yeah, is the planet received by its domicile lord, and by which aspect? The trine will be the friendliest and most supportive, whereas the square in opposition will be a little bit more difficult. And then the sextile is friendly, but not quite as strong as the trine. All right, and then finally, also we can look at, if you want to get into a little bit more of an advanced level here, you can also look at what is the condition of the domicile lord. Is the planet that is ruling that sign? So again, like if Mercury is in Aries, if Mars is like in a place that Mars does well and Mars is happy, that's going to be good for Mercury, because Mercury is in Mars's sign, is in Mars's house. The Roman astrologer Firmicus Maternus has a very famous kind of way of analogy or image for this, which is, he says that if you are a guest in someone's house, the fortunes of that person is going to, how well that person is doing is going to influence you. If you're a guest in someone's house and that person is doing great, their business is doing really well, they're really happy, everything's going to go well, your experience of staying in their house is going to be very different than if that person's just lost their job and experienced a bunch of personal tragedies and things are very difficult for that person. You as a guest in their house are going to have very different experiences. So that's a nice, more advanced way of talking about planets and signs, is also looking at the condition of the ruler of that sign. Yeah. Okay. So we're now 15 minutes over here. So we'll stop for the day here, and next time we'll take a look at houses in more detail. In the meantime, you can, I didn't create a slide for practices for next time, but just think about the signs of the zodiac and their symbolism, and you don't necessarily have to go through every single planet sign combination, but you can start thinking about how how the planets in different signs express themselves, and start getting a feeling for how the signs color the expressions of the planets. And if you've been following along with some of the hexagram rituals, you can try out. You don't have to go through all 12, but you could try out some hexagram rituals to invoke the zodiacal powers, and see what your results are like. So as always, there's a $5 suggested donation for anyone who's not a member of either the academic or initiatory track, and you can send that to payments@tots.org via PayPal. There's my email address there if you'd like to get in touch with me. And again, like I said, I'm happy to provide the slides. Especially the second half of those slides are really meant as a resource for everyone. And if you'd like more information about our work, you can visit tots.org/FAQ. So, all right, thanks everybody, and next time in 2 weeks we'll start moving towards the close of this series, and we'll build up. We'll kind of zoom in on houses, and we'll talk a little bit more about aspects as well, and build up a few other concepts there, and that'll really finish our basic. Our tour through the basic core components of astrology, and then in our last class we'll do a few miscellaneous things and wrap up a little bit. So thanks everybody watching on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to our channel if you'd like to get updates for more. 93s, everybody. Take care.